Between 1900 and 1930, Italian immigrant men accumulated property at rates that baffled their Irish and Polish neighbors and alarmed local banks. A 1933 Russell Sage Foundation study found Italian-born household heads in New York and Philadelphia owned property at 2.4 times the rate of comparable immigrant groups. Nobody had taught them American finance. They had brought something older. Hit subscribe. We're looking at 10 money rules Italian immigrant fathers passed down to their sons. Rules rarely written down, never discussed outside the family, and almost never survived the third generation. Number 10. The invisible wage. Before a son could learn to save money, he had to learn to misreport it, not to the government, to his own household. The practice was called tenere I soldi in tasca, keeping money in the pocket, and it worked like this. When a man's wages increased, he did not announce the raise. He reported the old number to his wife, kept the difference, and moved it to a separate reserve that only he controlled. This wasn't considered deception within the community. It was considered prudence. Rocco Saladino, a hod carrier in the north end of Boston, earned $14 a week in 1911 and told his wife he earned $12. In 1914, he got a raise to $17. He reported $13. By 1919, his hidden reserve totaled $620. He used it as the down payment on a two-family house on Endicott Street without ever explaining to his wife where the money had come from. She didn't ask. A 1929 sociologist at Yale named Phyllis Williams documented this practice in her fieldwork across Italian neighborhoods in New Haven. She called it a source of marital tension. The men she interviewed called it the only way to save when a woman worries. The women she interviewed knew about it and considered it normal. One 60-year-old woman from Salerno told Williams she had her own separate tin. Williams didn't pursue that line of inquiry further. The rule wasn't about distrust, it was about insulation. If the household budget was based on the reported wage, any emergency that threatened the household couldn't touch the reserve. The invisible wage was the family's immune system. Number 9. Never let the bank know what you have. Italian fathers in early 20th century American cities had a complicated relationship with banks. They used them. They didn't trust them. The distrust wasn't irrational. Savings banks in New York and Philadelphia had failed repeatedly between 1880 and 1910, wiping out the deposits of working-class families who had no recourse. Italian immigrants had also watched banks in the Mezzogiorno seize collateral from farmers who had borrowed against land during bad harvests. Banks were instruments that could work for you or against you, and the direction depended on who had more information. The rule was straightforward. Never deposit more than you were comfortable losing. Never consolidate. Spread money across multiple locations, multiple names, multiple institutions. Giuseppe Amoroso, a fruit vendor on Mulberry Street in Manhattan, kept accounts at 3 separate savings banks in 1921, none of them holding more than $200. The rest was in 2 tins behind the false wall in his cellar, in his wife's mother's mattress on Hester Street, and in a sealed jar in the Mutual Aid Society strongbox on Prince Street. A fire in 1923 destroyed his apartment. He lost $44. His neighbors, who had kept savings in the apartment, lost everything. Sons were taught this before they opened their first accounts. The father of a garment worker in Newark named Michael Cifelli told him in 1917, "The bank knows what you give them. Give them what you don't mind them knowing." Michael Cifelli owned a 4-unit building by 1934. He had never held more than $180 in any single bank at any single time. Number 8. The son pays, the father decides. In most Italian immigrant households, children who worked turned their wages over to the father. Every cent. This was not an informal arrangement. It was an expectation with no exceptions. But the fathers who built wealth did something the other fathers didn't. They kept records. Carmelo Gennaro, a Calabrian stonemason in Hoboken, had 4 sons working by 1922. The oldest worked at a garment factory. The second drove a delivery truck. The third shined shoes on the corner of First and Washington. The youngest swept floors at a barbershop for $2.50 a week. Every Friday night, each son placed his envelope on the kitchen table. Carmelo recorded every deposit in a small ledger he kept in Italian. Each son had a column. What the sons didn't know, until each one married, was that Carmelo had been holding their wages as a personal account. When his oldest son, Nico, married in 1924, Carmelo produced the ledger, calculated Nico's total contributions over 8 years, deducted a fair share of household expenses, and handed Nico the balance. It was $612. Nico used it as a down payment on a house in Bayonne. The same happened for each son. The practice accomplished 2 things simultaneously. It funded the household during the lean years, and it forced compulsory savings that the sons, left to their own devices, might not have maintained. The father was operating as both employer and banker. The sons never had the option to spend what they hadn't seen. A 1927 report from the New York Bureau of Municipal Research noted that Italian households showed unusually low rates of consumer debt among working sons still living at home. The researchers attributed it to cultural frugality. The actual mechanism was structural. The money wasn't available to spend. Number 7. Own the building before you furnish the room. Italian immigrant fathers had a categorical contempt for spending money on interior goods before acquiring real property. Furniture, curtains, decorative items, these were seen not as comfort, but as signals of misplaced priority. The saying circulated in multiple dialects, but the meaning was consistent. A man who buys a mirror before he buys land is a man who will always be looking at himself in someone else's house. This had practical expression. Francesco Mancini, a bricklayer in South Philadelphia, moved his family of 6 into a 3-room apartment on Christian Street in 1906. They slept on straw mattresses. They ate at a table that was a plank on 2 sawhorses. They had 2 chairs. Francesco's wife, Concetta, wanted to buy a proper bed frame and a real table. Francesco refused. Every dollar that wasn't spent on food or rent went into a tin in the floorboards. In 1912, Francesco purchased a row house on Tasker Street for $1,100, putting $300 down. He immediately rented the first floor to a cousin for $9 a month. In 1914, he bought the building next door when the Irish owner left for a factory job in Pittsburgh. The proper furniture came in 1916. The beds and table and chairs arrived the same week as the deed to the second property. Francesco's oldest son, who had been 11 years old when they first moved to Christian Street and had slept on a straw mattress for 10 years, later told his own son, "Your grandfather didn't buy a table until he owned the floor under it." Number 6. The debt you don't show. Italian immigrant fathers operated an informal credit system with their paesani, men from the same village or region in Italy that was invisible to anyone outside the community and that functioned more reliably than any bank. The system worked like this. A man who needed capital for a down payment, a business opening, or an emergency would go to 2 or 3 trusted men from his network and ask for a loan. No interest was charged, no written contract was signed. The terms were understood. Repay when you can, don't take longer than a man could wait, and honor the obligation publicly by serving as the lender's guarantor when the lender needed the same. What made it function was reputation. A man who failed to repay a personal loan from a paesano didn't just lose money. He lost standing in the mutual aid society. He lost his ability to borrow in the future. He lost the social infrastructure that Italians depended on for employment referrals, housing leads, business arrangements, and family connections. Pietro Esposito, a longshoreman in Hoboken, needed $180 to buy a share in a small trucking operation in 1924. He went to 4 men. Each lent him $45 with no paperwork. By 1927, he had repaid all 4 and the trucking operation had become his primary income. By 1931, he had lent money to 7 men himself. The sons learned the rule as a statement of identity, not finance. A man who repays his debts to Paisani before he repays his debts to banks has his priorities right. The bank couldn't ruin your daughter's marriage prospects. A dishonored neighbor could. Number 5. Never tell a man what you paid. Price opacity was a principle, not a tactic. Italian immigrant fathers taught their sons that revealing what you paid for anything, a house, a horse, a delivery route, a load of stone, gave the other person leverage in every subsequent negotiation. If a man knew you had paid $900 for a building, he knew your floor, he knew your ceiling, he knew what you thought the market would bear. You had handed him a map. The practice extended beyond negotiation into social life. Italian men in immigrant communities frequently didn't know what their neighbors had paid for their own properties. This was deliberate. The culture actively discouraged financial transparency between even close friends. A 1931 article in Il Progresso Italo-Americano noted, almost with admiration, that Italians were the most financially private of all immigrant groups in the city. The reporter meant it as an observation. The fathers reading it considered it a compliment. Nunzio Caputo, a produce merchant in Federal Hill in Providence, bought 3 small storefronts between 1917 and 1928. His sons, who worked with him daily, did not know what he had paid for any of them until after his death in 1944, when the estate was probated. The eldest son, telling the story in 1967, said, "He'd have died before he told us. Not because he didn't trust us, because he thought knowing would make us careless." The sons were taught, speak about money in terms of what remains, not what was spent. A man who talks about what he paid is already thinking about what he lost. Number 4. The feast day rule. To anyone outside the community, the Italian immigrant feast day looked like financial recklessness. On the feast day of San Gennaro in Manhattan's Little Italy, on the feast of St. Joseph in New Orleans' Sicilian neighborhoods, on the feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel in East Harlem, families that had spent 11 months in rigid austerity would spend money they appeared not to have. Candles, donations to the church, food for tables that fed 30 people, new clothes for the children, contributions to the band, to the fireworks, to the statue procession. American observers in the 1910s and 1920s frequently cited feast day spending as evidence of Italian financial irresponsibility. Social workers wrote about it with dismay. Settlement house workers tried to redirect the spending toward savings bonds. What they misunderstood was that feast day spending was itself a financial instrument. The families that gave most visibly to the church and to the feast committee received reciprocal benefits that couldn't be quantified in a budget. The priest who saw you give $15 to the San Gennaro Fund would advocate for your son's scholarship application. The feast committee chairman who saw you donate the olive oil would advance your husband's name for the construction foreman position. The neighbors who ate at your feast day table became the men who lent you $50 without a contract in 1929. Domenico Vitale of East Harlem spent $60 on the 1921 Our Lady of Mount Carmel feast. That was 3 weeks of wages. He received, within 18 months, a favorable loan referral from the Parish Mutual Aid Society that helped him purchase a building on 115th Street. The connection was never spoken aloud by either party. The fathers who understood this taught their sons, the feast day is not spending. It is investment in the only currency that cannot be seized by a bank. Number 3. The goat before the store. Before an Italian father helped his son open a business, he insisted on a different kind of security. The rule, which existed in variations across Calabrian, Sicilian, and Neapolitan communities, held that no man should depend entirely on one source of income. A man with a store but no garden was a hostage to the store. A man with a store and a garden could survive the store closing. A man with a store, a garden, and a rental unit was nearly unbreakable. The goat in the saying was symbolic. It meant the productive asset that provided sustenance independent of commerce. In New York and Philadelphia tenements, this manifested as rooftop gardens, basement wine operations, backyard chickens where the city permitted them, and fig trees in pots that were lugged inside during winter. Angelo Russo, a Sicilian tailor in Utica, New York, grew tomatoes and peppers on a 14 by 20-foot plot behind his building. He made wine in his cellar every October, producing approximately 80 gallons a year. He kept 3 hens. He rented one room of his apartment to a boarder for $4 a month. In 1929, his tailoring business fell by 40% during the first year of the Depression. He didn't close. The garden, wine, and boarder income covered his rent and food with $2 per week remaining. By 1933, he was one of 3 tailors still operating in his neighborhood. The other 4 had closed between 1930 and 1932. His son Enzo was told, "The goat doesn't care if nobody's buying suits." The family still grows tomatoes. The last person who knew why moved to a nursing home in Utica in 1991 and died the following spring. Number 2. Teach the son what you don't teach the wife. This rule is uncomfortable to state plainly, but it shaped a generation of Italian-American family finance. Immigrant fathers deliberately withheld full financial information from their wives and shared it selectively with their eldest sons. The practice was not born of malice. It was born of a specific risk calculation about survival in American cities that the men had developed, and the women, who had less exposure to American financial and legal systems, had not. The father who taught his son the location of every tin, the name of every paisano who owed him money, the terms of every handshake loan, the real price paid for every property. That father was not excluding his wife. He was creating redundancy. If he died, the wife would have the household. The son would have the map. Carmine Loria of Newark died of appendicitis in 1928 at the age of 46, leaving a wife and 5 children. His oldest son, 16-year-old Vincenzo, had spent 3 years accompanying his father to meetings with the Mutual Aid Society, to handshake deals with suppliers, to the savings bank on Broad Street, where the family held one of its accounts. Vincenzo knew about the other 2 accounts, both under different family names. He knew about the $340 in the tin under the 3rd floorboard from the back wall of the cellar. Carmine's wife, Filomena, survived. So did the family. Vincenzo, who had no formal financial education and had finished 6th grade, managed the family's assets with accuracy his father would have recognized. The men who didn't teach their sons paid a different price. 3 families in the Loria building on Bloomfield Avenue lost their property within 2 years of the father's death because no one knew what they owned, what they owed, or where the money was. Filomena knew about all of them. The rule is uncomfortable. It was also effective. The fathers who made it this far didn't care about comfort. Number 1. Money has a sound, not a smell. The final rule was philosophical, and it was the one fathers saved for when a son had learned everything else. Italian immigrant fathers, almost universally from the rural south of Italy, had grown up in economies where money was associated with land, with seasons, with visible work. In America, they encountered money made in ways that were invisible, in speculation, in lending, in businesses that produced nothing physical. They had to decide what to teach their sons about this. The answer they arrived at, across community after community, was pragmatic to the point of hardness. Money doesn't know how it was made. it spends the same whether it came from bricklaying or bartending or renting a room to someone you don't like. The sin is not in how money arrives. The sin is in letting it leave without purpose. This was sometimes stated as "I soldi non hanno odore." Money has no smell. A phrase with Roman origins, reborn in Newark and Boston and South Philadelphia in the mouths of men who had carried it across the ocean in their memory because it was too important to leave behind. The practical application was that Italian fathers didn't raise sons to be proud about labor while staying poor. They raised sons to understand that work produced money, and money, moved correctly, hidden when necessary, deployed slowly, never announced, produced security. The pride was in the outcome, not the method. By 1940, Italian-born men and their sons owned 31% of the small businesses in South Philadelphia, a neighborhood where they were 22% of the population. They held mortgages on 44% of the row houses on certain blocks off Broad Street. They had done this in 40 years, starting with nothing, in a city that had posted no Italian signs in factory windows as recently as 1905. The sons who remembered the rules became the fathers who repeated them. The grandsons who were told they were old-fashioned let them go. The last person Salvatore Ferrante gave a tin box to was his son in 1921. His grandson got a savings account at a bank in Collingswood, New Jersey in 1955. It had his name on it. Everyone knew about it. He thought that was better.